It has taken a long time, but finally I'm speaking here in France and in Paris, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you. I apologize for not being able to speak in French. My knowledge of French is too rudimentary, but we have a very ingenious system here. It's a combination of human and artificial intelligence that produces this translation that hopefully you can see behind me on the screen. I'll tell you just very briefly how it works. I speak, or something speaks through me, and behind the stage we have some wonderful people. I'd like to thank them in advance for their work. They will be working very hard, probably harder than me, providing the translation. As I speak, somebody behind stage will simultaneously translate into French the words that I speak. Then artificial intelligence will kick in, and the words that our interpreter translates are then translated or transcribed by artificial intelligence, and so they appear on the screen, but not yet. We have another stage. We have people who are checking to see if the artificial intelligence has actually chosen the right words. Otherwise, we could have some very embarrassing mistakes happening. I speak fairly slowly, especially at the beginning, so that's helpful. The interpreters can warm up, and usually I also warm up, and as the evening progresses, the tendency is for me to speak a little faster. So, oh, hi, up there. Hi. It's a wonderful space here. Usually, I assume on this stage, it's a theater, interesting things happen. People running around, performing, whatever they do. But tonight, there's just a man sitting on a chair. And this man sitting on a chair is going to talk for about 2 hours. Now, if you went to see a movie lasting an hour and a half to 2 hours, to keep you in your seat and keep you interested, the movie would have to provide a lot of action and excitement. Something needs to happen. It needs to be interesting, otherwise you get bored. But how could a man sitting on a chair talking for 2 hours be interesting? He would have to say something of extraordinary importance for you to stay interested, for you to find it actually enjoyable to be here. And this is probably a good indicator whether or not you are awakening spiritually, to use this term. Are you enjoying this evening? You won't know yet. Maybe you're already bored. We don't know. Are you enjoying this evening? In order to enjoy this evening, there needs to be something else in you in addition to intellectual understanding of the mic just stopped. We are meant to be still. Some divine intervention will happen in a minute. Maybe if I ring the bell, it'll start again. Oh, I don't need to ring the bell. It's working again. Our evening operates on two levels. One is the conventional level. Words are spoken, concepts, mental concepts. And to some extent, you can understand those concepts. You listen. You understand? But the essence of our evening does not happen on a conceptual level. Conceptual understanding of what I'm talking about will not be enough to make this evening enjoyable for you. Conceptual understanding will not be enough. It might be interesting up to a point, and then, or maybe not even that. And then your mind will say, what is he actually talking about? What have I actually learned? Not that much. So the concepts that I use point beyond themselves. They are just little signposts. Not things to believe in. There's very little that I say tonight that you need to believe in. It is more a question of inviting you, by using concepts as signposts, inviting you to actually experience for yourself or realize for yourself what it is that I'm talking about. And what it is that I'm talking about is a certain dimension of consciousness in you that is awakening or is ready, is just at the point of being ready to awaken. And most humans on the planet don't even know that such a dimension exists, although all the ancient teachers, spiritual teachers have pointed to it and spoken about it. And in most humans it is only a potential, a dormant potential, but not in you, because you have come here. Something has drawn you here. And it is not because you want to listen to this fascinating, charismatic speaker, because the speaker is not really that fascinating and charismatic. So it's not that. The truth is, you haven't really come to listen to me, to the speaker. You have come to be with yourself. It is meant to deepen, either encounter, or if you have encountered it already, to deepen this awakening dimension of consciousness in you that we could call awareness or we could call it presence. So most of you have been drawn here because of that. There may be a few here who have not come here voluntarily, who have come here because they could not say no to a friend or a relative who said, "You must come and listen to this person." Okay, I'll come. And now you sit there and wondering what it is that this man is talking about. But that's fine. Give yourself a little bit of time, and you may actually begin to have some sense of what it is this evening is all about, or not. And if not, if the compulsion to remove yourself from here and go to a bar next door, if that compulsion becomes too strong, please do remove yourself. Perfectly fine. Nobody here will judge you, because most people here are very advanced spiritually and they do not judge others. And if you need to go to the toilet, don't hesitate to go, and don't think that if I get up and go, the people will think that I'm completely unawakened. So we could say that the subject matter of this evening is really you. I'm going to talk ultimately about you, and I will be pointing to something in you that is easily overlooked, but is of extraordinary importance if you want to live a fulfilled and meaningful life, instead of a life that is full of frustration and ultimately suffering, a life that is experienced, in the words of Churchill, who was actually talking about history, one damn thing after another. One damn thing after another. So the story, if we go back to the beginning, the story of you, let's travel back in time to a prehistoric mythological time where we encounter a young man going for a walk in the woods, and his name, according to ancient Greek mythology, is Narcissus. Narcissus, the young man walking in the woods, very happy, contemplating nature, not disturbed yet by incoming text messages or Facebook postings or Instagram or possible Tinder dates, not distracted by anything, just being there, present, enjoying the aliveness of the present moment. And then this young man came upon a pool of water, or a little pond, very still pond. And of course, at those times, there were no mirrors yet. There was no technology. Mirrors had not been invented. He looked into the pond and he saw his own reflection in the pond. And he was amazed at the beauty of his own reflection. Now you might think, is that perhaps a very ancient prophecy of the selfie? Can't take my eyes off it. No, it was not a prophecy of the selfie, but there's a connection, of course. There is a connection. This is the glass surface of the selfie, and here we have the reflection of the image of his own image in the water. Now, the story goes that he fell in love with his own reflection, and he could not get away from it. He got drawn back to it again and again. And although the story says that he fell in love with his own reflection, a more precise way of putting it would be to say that he became obsessed with his own reflection, because ultimately, I don't know if you have experienced it ever, falling in love is a kind of obsession. Not loving, love is something else. I'm talking about falling in love, of course, is a very obsessive thing. I need you. Don't you ever leave me. And then, of course, he or she leaves, or you leave. That's a long story. We all know it. And he lost his happiness. He was no longer happy. There are different versions of the story, but in the more ancient versions, eventually he commits suicide. So that story in mythology often expresses a deep truth which otherwise humans would not understand or could not express in any abstract way. The truth needs to be embedded in a story. And there's a very deep truth here that points to the arising of a mentally created self-image that people have and live with. So it's almost as if you had a phantom that walks with you wherever you go, that is your mind-created image or concept of who you are. And that is what we call the ego. The ego is a mental image conditioned by the past, conditioned by your environment and many other factors. A mental image, a conceptual sense of self that you identify with so completely that you disappear in it and live through it. You believe that that is who you are. And that is the conditioned, mind-made self. It consists of layers, different layers. At the most fundamental level, first of all, everybody identifies, first of all, with your physical body. That's the most fundamental level of identification. You believe that you are the body. You identify with the body that you are. And the body, of course, already is a problematic thing to identify with, because you compare this body that you say, I am this body, this physical form, and then you compare to others, and it can be a source of pride if your body is better looking or stronger than most other bodies. The ego gets in there and feels inflated, greater. And it can also be a source of suffering or shame if your body is not the way you think it should be, or society tells you it should be, or when you compare it to others, it's not as strong or as beautiful as others, then you suffer. You have a sense of self that feels less than. On the other side, you might have a sense of self that feels more than. People who have a strong or beautiful body, when I was young, I would have given 20 years of my life if God or the universe had said to me, I can give you a beautiful, strong body and make you into a good-looking man that attracts countless women. I would have said, it's a deal. 20 years of my life, I'll be happy, but it didn't happen. But I can see how people who are good-looking or strong or both, how easy it is for them to seek a large part of their identity in their external appearance. And that can be fine for a while, but inevitably, of course, what is a source of pleasure for some years, gradually and perhaps even quickly turns into a source of suffering because the body does not last. And a day comes when you look in the mirror and the mirror image is no longer the same as it was 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. Especially if you have a photo of yourself next to the mirror, something went very wrong here. And then it becomes a source of suffering. Now, in our civilization, there are repair jobs that you can do that for a while will help you feel you're still okay, good looking, but inevitably you suffer, begin to suffer more and more because who you think you are is diminishing. Who you think you are, the value, your sense of self-worth is diminishing, and that's a source of great suffering. And of course, humans who identified with a negative body image, they are suffering already when they are young. They don't have to wait until the body grows old. So we have identification with the body, and then you put clothes on the body, of course, that they become an extension of the body, and they can add something, they can hide things, they can conceal things that don't look so good, or they can enhance things that look good. And then it's nice, so people are looking at me. It feels good to the ego. This is form, I call it, form identity. Form, physical form. And that's only the beginning of your form identity. Now we go on to what you identify with on the level of the mind, because here we have a huge set of thoughts, images, and narratives that continuously go through your head that are the result of environment, the culture you grow up in, even the language that you grow up with is more than just a communication tool. The language that you grow up with conditions you already to behave in a certain way. And so you are recognizable to many people then as, oh, there's a French person. Others can recognize, oh, there's an Italian, there's an Englishman. They can sometimes easily be recognized because of that conditioning. So you get gradually thoughts arise as the child grows up, begins to grow up. The child learns language. The child asks questions. What is this? What is that? Gradually, concepts form in the mind of the child. And with certain concepts, the child identifies. Identify means it gives you your sense of who you are. It gives you your sense of self. My toy is one of the first things. This is my toy. This is the beginning of the ego. You cannot stop it. You cannot tell a child, don't say my toy, it's your ego. The child has to go through that stage. The ego ideally is a stage that people grow out of as they grow up. However, that mostly is not the case, unfortunately. Most humans never grow out of it. So, my toy, remove a toy from a child that the child has called my, creates enormous suffering. The child will cry or scream, as if you had torn a limb. You had torn something off the child's body. Mine is taken, mine. And of course, if that has not happened, 5 minutes later the child would have lost interest in it completely. So it is not the toy that causes the suffering, it is the mental concept of toy that the child identifies with that causes the suffering. And that is the beginning. Then, of course, the child also is told a name. The child identifies with a name. This is one of the first things a child is taught. You are John, or whatever typical French name might be. Pierre. Je suis Pierre. Oh. Qui es-tu? Je suis Pierre. Oh. Now I know who I am. It's a concept, and the concept is endowed with a sense of self. And the concept is the thought. It's a thought. But it's not an ordinary thought. It's a thought that has a sense of self in it. And this is why we use the term identify. You derive your identity from that particular thought. And once you have this thought, which is a thought form, another aspect of your form identity, then other things begin to accumulate around the name of who you are. Possessions, toys is possessions, then other things accumulate, things that you can do, things that others cannot do, things that you know that others don't know, things that your parents have and other parents don't have. And then gradually more and more things begin to accumulate around the central core of the conceptual self. And as you then grow up, before you know it, you live through this mind-made sense of self, and you begin to develop a narrative, and you call this narrative me and my life. That's my life, that's me. And that's your history, your personal history, and things in your personal history that you strongly identify with. Things that happened to you, and especially things that other people did to you, your parents, for example. And there's no childhood that is free of suffering. There are always people who do things to you. And so you have this sense of self that is based on your personal history and all the things that are the conditioning of who you are. Your culture, your collective conditioning, not only your country, it might be your religion, it might be many other things that you identify with as me. That's me, that is I. That is, and then as you grow up, you continue to live through a conceptual reality of yourself that is revived by thinking about it and talking about it. And for most people, it's a very problematic sense of self. There's no ego that is not problematic. And the ego, that mind-made sense of self, always has a sense of lack. Something is still missing. Something is not right. Something, I don't know what it is, but many people have the feeling they need to arrive somewhere, but they have not arrived yet. Other people have the feeling that their life has not quite started yet. They are still getting ready to live. They're looking forward to a point in the future where my life actually takes off. When is it going to? It's certainly not this, where I live now, the work I'm doing now, who I'm with. But that can't be my life. I'm waiting, as the English expression goes. I don't know how they translate that. I'm waiting for my break, my big break. I'm waiting for it to make it. And of course, there are people who reach the age of 65 and 70 and say, it never started. My life never started. I've always been waiting for something, both on a small scale, waiting for the weekend or the next vacation, or on a larger scale, waiting for the ultimately fulfilling relationship, the ultimately fulfilling financial situation, the ultimately fulfilling living situation. I've been waiting for it, and occasionally I thought I had arrived. But it always turned out to be an illusion. I have spoken to some famous people who tell me that after they became famous, for a while they felt elated. Their ego grew and grew. And then something happened, and they were even more unhappy than before, because there was still that sense of, that's not it. And they realized that the image that other people had of them was a complete illusion. What the newspapers wrote about them was complete illusion. And so there was this sudden realization that this is not who I am, but who am I? And then they either take drugs in order to dull the pain, to desensitize themselves to the pain, or they open up to the deeper dimension of who they are. So let's look for a moment at your life, which is a thing probably of great interest to you. Your life, there's not a single person in this room whose life is not problematic and challenging. There's no doubt that life is difficult. There's nobody for whom life is not difficult. And if your life were not difficult, in other words, if you were not challenged by life, that would turn into the greatest difficulty. if you were not challenged by life, then that lack of challenge would become your greatest challenge. But there are very few people, it never lasts for long. You might have a trust fund from your parents or grandparents. You may have enough money and you never need to work, look for a job, have a nice house already when you're 20 and a great car when you're 20, and you can go wherever you want, and there you are. And you would find that this life would become deeply unfulfilling after a few years. And then that will turn into your challenge. So there's no getting away from the fact that life will always challenge you. Okay, we need to let go of the belief, the unspoken belief, that this should not be happening, that there should be no problems in my life. There are many people who feel that they have personally been singled out by the universe or by God or some malevolent entity to make their lives difficult. I was one of those. I was deeply identified with negative thoughts, and whenever something bad happened to me, it already started when I was 16, whenever something bad happened to me, I had a thought, and that thought would say, of course, bad things always happen to me, always to me. Look at these people, how happy they are. But everything bad always happens to me. And it did. So the challenges are actually the most important thing in your evolution. It is because life makes you challenge. Life seems to put obstacles in your path. I want to get there, but now something is blocking me. There is an obstacle on my path, and life does it all the time. Something goes wrong, just the moment you think, now I'm there, I made it, I got this great job now. Then something else goes wrong in your relationship, or your physical body, or somebody close to you suddenly has a huge problem, or the living situation, or there's a huge marital thing, your wife falls in love with somebody else. There's always something to interfere with the smooth functioning. You cannot have all the things that make up your life functioning smoothly simultaneously. Living situation, work situation, financial situation, health situation, whatever else may be, all your children are happy and doing very well. And you can travel, and your body is totally and perfectly healthy, and everything is just fantastic. Well, it could happen for a little while, not long. If you say, yes, I'm one of those people that you're talking about, this has happened in my life, just wait a little and see what happens then. So to demand internally that life should leave you alone, don't put obstacles in my path, this is not how the universe functions. Every life form experiences challenges. From the smallest life form, even a plant or a little animal, the moment they are born, they are confronted with challenges. And it's only by being confronted with challenges that evolution happens. If you were not confronted, or any life form were not confronted with challenges, life on this planet or any other planet would not evolve. And your life would not evolve. And everybody here is here because you have experienced challenges. You have suffered. You have been unhappy. And to some extent, you might still be, but you're seeing the possibility of not transforming the challenges of life into suffering. The challenges will not stop. But the question is, are you internally, because of your mental conditioning, transforming every challenge, the little one, the big one, transforming every problem and every challenge that life throws at you, transforming it into unhappiness, into misery, into suffering, what the Buddha called dukkha, which is translated as suffering, unhappiness, misery, unsatisfactoriness, whatever you want to call it. Now here we come to the possibility not of being free of challenges. If you demand that of the universe or of God, you will be very disappointed and condemned to continuous frustration. No, not demanding that life should not be challenging anymore, but realizing the possibility of no longer transforming the challenges of life into unhappiness or suffering. Now this is something worth exploring. Is it possible to go through life without creating suffering for yourself? Now, that's already a strange way of speaking about it, because it always seems that the unhappiness in your life is created by circumstances around you. Everybody believes that, of course, this particular situation is making me unhappy. And in many, many cases, the circumstances that make you unhappy are to do with people, because people are so difficult. You might have noticed. So for many people, other people, whether it's a relationship or at work, this is a huge source of suffering for many people, because other people are making your life difficult. Which of course is why Jean-Paul Sartre said, hell is les autres, which is translated into English as other people. Hell is these people there. But of course it can come in many forms. Now, a very interesting experiment, you start on a small scale with little suffering, which normally would not even be recognized as suffering. Let's say there are many, as you might realize in modern life, there are many frustrating things. And I could take any of the many frustrating things that you encounter in modern life. For example, even just wanting to talk to your bank on the phone, but you cannot reach, I don't know if it's the same here, you cannot reach a human being. You can only reach pre-recorded messages, and then you go select this, and finally you think, okay, to talk to somebody, press 0 after 10 minutes, and then there's a waiting period now of 25 minutes. And when you finally get through, somebody speaks with such a strong foreign accent because they're in the Philippines or in India, and you can't understand what they're saying. But already you've built up an enormous amount of frustration and irritation. Irritation is a small form of suffering. It could happen also another place where you can encounter this minor suffering is at airports or in traffic. These are when you get irritated. this is not usually recognized as suffering, but it is a small form of suffering. And somebody who gets irritated several times a day over a period of years builds up an enormous amount of unresolved suffering within him or her. They build up, and then you become basically the irritation becomes part of your ego, and you go through life just waiting for the next thing to be irritated about, because it strengthens your fictitious sense of self for the ego. And the moment you react, the ego gets inflated. Perhaps we've all met people like that. There's nobody here like that, of course, because otherwise you wouldn't have come here. Or if there is, if you recognize it in yourself right now, that's a wonderful thing. That self-recognition. You might be totally irritated with me. Well, that's a great thing to realize that you are irritated with the speaker. Why? Because he hasn't said anything significant yet. So now you experiment with a small form of suffering. Let's go be on the telephone or at the airport or in the traffic jam, and you get... How does the suffering arise? You need to have some awareness to ask yourself, how does this arise? Well, the mind says, well, because of this thing that's happening here, and these people are totally incompetent. Or the traffic, I live in this, why am I living here in this, just so, all the fumes and the traffic, it's so dreadful. Okay. And then you look more closely, is this situation causing you the suffering, or is it something that you add to the situation? What is it that you add to the situation? What you add to the situation is certain thoughts, and those thoughts are not pleasant. So these thoughts are saying, this should not be happening, or they are saying, I don't want to be here. Or they are saying, I want to be somewhere else. Or they say, this is such a dreadful situation, I can't stand it anymore. I just can't stand it. I can't stand this. And suddenly you wake up, something else arises, awareness. Awareness of your own thought processes. That is awakening. That is spiritual awakening, the beginning of it. When you become aware of the voice in the head instead of being identified with the voice in the head. There is an awareness. And you are in this situation, and suddenly you see, okay, how would I experience this situation if I did not add those thoughts to it? If I just let it be without the addition of certain thoughts that are saying that this should not be happening, I don't want to be here, whatever they say. That's a good experiment. And then in this experiment, you drop the thoughts for a moment. So there you are. Let's say you're at the airline counter waiting to check in, and you've been standing there for 25 minutes. It might even say the flight is delayed by 3 hours, or nobody's telling you anything. And there you are getting very irritated and say, okay, I'm not adding any thought to this moment, and I'm just experiencing this moment as it is. And suddenly you're experiencing this moment as it is. What is it that you're experiencing? You're experiencing yourself as standing there, breathing, perceiving, visual perception. You look around, humans, lights, people moving here and there, and you can feel your body. Perhaps there's a little pain in the body because you've been standing there for a while, but that's not suffering, it's a little pain in the body. So there you are. And suddenly you feel, well, this situation is not actually as bad as my mind said it was. That's weird. And then you realize, actually, it's not bad at all. It just is the way it is. You no longer add mental baggage to the situation, and you take this moment as it is. If you can take action, of course you take action. If you say, okay, I'm standing in this lineup at the airline counter, I've been standing here for 25 minutes, maybe there's a better lineup, I can move there. If you can do something, you do it. But if there's no possibility of changing the situation, this is what is. So to argue internally, to argue with what is something that strengthens the egoic sense of self. Because this mind-made sense of self needs to have enemies. It needs to fight against this and that, because then it feels this boundary of me more strongly. It needs opposition, it needs antagonism. So that's unconscious. The ego gets stronger when you complain mentally. Then the egos, you feel you are morally superior to the situation. When you complain about a person, you're obviously more superior to that person. You know what he did, and you know what he said to me, and then I said to him, and then how can he do such a thing? Of course, not all the stories that you tell, and the interesting thing about the stories that the ego tells is that you are always right and the others are always wrong. Isn't that strange? I'm always right, other people are always wrong. I hadn't realized that. I must be superior to everybody. But of course, that's the ego. We remove a huge amount of suffering from life and unhappiness when we do not add unnecessary baggage to situations that arise. And when I say situations, what I mean is, of course, the present moment. It's always, every situation happens in the present moment. Your entire life unfolds in the present moment. In fact, there is nothing else. We live, most humans live, as if the next moment or the one after that were more important than this moment. But it's not. This moment is always more important than the next moment. It doesn't mean we cannot make plans. We need to make plans. But whatever plan we make, we plan to meet here tonight. That's fine. But any moment, no future moment can be more important than this moment, because there is only this moment. And when the future moment comes, it again is this moment. There is no future, although we need it for practical purposes. But ultimately, if there were a future, somebody would have discovered it and said, oh, there it is. I found the future. And then, of course, you realize, oh no, it's the present moment. So the future is a thought in your head, and the past are thoughts in your head. And when are you thinking those thoughts? Now. So even the past cannot exist without being revived in the now. So there is only now. Now, if we have a dysfunctional, bad, unpleasant relationship habitually with the present moment, and many people live like that. They always want to be somewhere else. This is never good enough. They're always complaining about something. If you live that way, then, of course, you are condemned to continuous suffering without even knowing it, and always blaming some external factor. That's the essence of unconscious living. So one of the greatest, or perhaps the most important spiritual practice is to come to a relationship with the present moment that is friendly. You might as well, because your entire life is experienced as the present moment. So no matter what form the present moment takes, even if it's challenging, you no longer resent the fact that this moment is challenging. You accept, and then you see, is action possible? Do I need to take action? You look, and then you take action. Or, right now, no action is possible, then you let go of any kind of resistance. And even if you take action, it's better to come to a place of non-resistance first, so that you are more deeply connected with life. When you are in a place of non-resistance, you connect more deeply with life, you go deeper than the ego. The ego lives through resistance of the present moment. So the entire edifice of the mind-made sense of self can be transcended if your life becomes more focused on the present moment, and you honor the present moment. That's an important thing, because you encounter life in the present moment. Honoring the present moment, another word for that is gratitude. Gratitude for what is at this moment, even if it's only, you might be sitting in a room, there's a light, you can have gratitude for the lights that are shining here, the flowers, which means you appreciate, you give some attention, you appreciate, because otherwise you go through life just always pursuing a mental phantom. One day I'm going to be okay, I just need to get there, I just need to get to the office, I need to get there and there and there. So, yes, of course you can still make plans, you need to make plans, but you make plans in the present moment, without believing that when you arrive at a certain point in the so-called future, this is going to make you happy. Nothing and nobody is going to make you happy. Yes, your life can improve, of course, the external conditions or circumstances of your life can improve, and sometimes they do. That's fine. But you're not to seeking self-fulfillment through that is the error, is the mistake. So, in other words, you need to find what is conventionally called happiness, although I don't call it happiness because the term happiness sounds a little superficial. Something great has just happened to me, I'm so happy. And of course the next day it disappears or it no longer makes you happy. But there's a deeper sense of joy and aliveness and a deep inner peace that is there when you live in inner alignment with the present moment and whatever form it takes. Then what happens as you practice that, this is a form of gratitude. In gratitude you don't even need to say thank you. You can say thank you for this or thank you for that, or you can simply, without words, appreciate the life that's happening around you now and the life that is within you now. To feel the life that animates the body. I call it the inner body. As you sit here now, feel the life that animates the inner body. Every cell is alive. You can feel that aliveness. And that takes you out of the thinking mind without losing consciousness. And here we come to the actual central point of our gathering here tonight. And that central point of extraordinary importance, it is the next step in the evolution of human consciousness. And what is that? What is this step? Human consciousness has developed the incredible ability to think over many thousands of years. We already saw the story of Narcissus. Narcissus developed a mental, mind-created image of who he was, and that made him gradually unhappy. He lost touch with himself, so he became so drawn into the mind that he lost touch with the connectedness with being. He identified with the image. And so every human being ultimately goes through that stage. You live through a mental image, and as you do, this mental image is the ego, and the ego is never satisfied for long, never satisfied for long, and feels incomplete, has problems with self-esteem and self-worth, all the problems that your dog does not have. Your dog, you might have noticed, has no problem with self-esteem, has no problem with body image, has no problem with a conceptual sense of self. The dog or your cat has no conceptual sense of self. Consciousness, yes. You can look into the eyes of the dog and you can sense there is a conscious being there. But this dog has no conceptual identity. It lives from the depths of his or her being. And this is why the dog is more joyful than most humans. And this is why the tail of the dog wags so often, because the dog senses the joy of life. Why? Because he hasn't gone through the stage of Narcissus yet, has not developed a mental image, has not developed this a wonderful thing, the ability to think. But then the price that we had to pay was our whole identity became caught up in thinking. So we began to inhabit a conceptual reality. Instead of experiencing reality directly, as the dog still does, we inhabit a conceptual reality, and we have a conceptual sense of self, and we impose a conceptual sense of self on every other human that we meet. We immediately have judgments about those humans, mental judgments, this and this and this. We immediately interpret everything according to the conditioning of the mind. How we interpret things varies from culture to culture. If you had been born somewhere in Africa, or if you had been born in Saudi Arabia, you would interpret reality in a different way. But it makes little difference, because you would be identified with your particular mental interpretations. So The present moment is a little doorway that opens up out of this complete identification with what has become excessive thinking, unnecessary thinking, because you think you need to think continuously in order to sustain your sense of identity. And so at night you wake up and you think about your life. There's no action you can take right there and then, but you're thinking about it, and usually it's not pleasant. All the things that went wrong or could go wrong, and it hasn't worked out the way it should have worked, and you go, oh, it's so difficult, my life. And then the next day you say, let me tell you about my life. You say to someone you meet, you think you had a difficult life? No, listen to my story. And then you tell and retell the story, sustained by thought. And so this overthinking, this excessive thinking, is a source of enormous unhappiness for millions of people on the planet. So as we saw, they are not made unhappy ultimately by the circumstances of their lives. They are made unhappy by overthinking. And even if there was a time when I was homeless. Now one would have said, well, if a homeless person is fully justified in being unhappy, you might have thought, well, not so. I was not unhappy as a homeless person. In fact, I was very happy being totally present. I'm not saying you should become homeless to experience it. You don't need to experience it. But if it should ever happen to you, it can be an opportunity for being totally present, totally in the present moment. I would sit on park benches just looking around. Everything was so alive and beautiful. And then my hand would go into my pocket. I would see how much money I'd left. Say, oh. I was in England at the time. £3.50. That's just enough for whatever I could buy, a sandwich or something. What's going to happen after that? My mind didn't even go there because I had gone through this shift in consciousness. So there was just an aliveness. And always at the last moment, something came to help. And then occasionally people would come and sit next to me on a bench and say, who is this strange person? And they asked questions. That was the beginning of a spiritual teaching, a person asking me a question on a park bench. And I said, well, I didn't have any answers. Well, occasionally an answer came, but it wasn't prepared. And I always surprised myself what answer came. Oh, I didn't know I knew that. So even in extreme circumstances, nowadays there are millions of people are refugees these days. They lose their home. And of course one would think, are they not fully justified in being unhappy? I would suggest that even in limit situations like this, there is the possibility of spiritual awakening. In fact, particularly in limit situations, this is a term from existentialist philosophy, limit situation, especially in limit situations, when life challenges you in such a severe way that it removes many things from you that you had identified with, that gave you a sense of security, your home, your relationships, perhaps even your health, all your money. And sometimes life takes away several of these things at once. And that's usually regarded as something terrible. And on one level it is. But potentially it is a way, and it has happened to many people, quite not the majority of people who suffer this, but a certain percentage, who experience an awakening through this. Because if life removes things that you had identified with, who are you? Who am I without this? Who am I without my job, without my house, without my possessions, perhaps even without my relationships? Everything is gone. Who am I now? Now the ego is extremely fearful of this moment, and there's enormous suffering there, but potentially there's also an opening into who or what you are beyond the mind-created self. Because there's nothing left, and then suddenly, after going through suffering, you may suddenly wake up and say, I don't know what happened, and I don't know why, but I feel this deep peace, and I have nothing. I suddenly feel, Jesus called it the peace that passes all understanding, which means you cannot explain, well, although I'm trying to explain it, you cannot explain why this person should suddenly be so peaceful. So I believe that no matter whether you are a Christian or whether you are not a Christian, there is a deep truth embodied in the central image of Christianity. And the central image of Christianity is a man who is on the cross, an extreme form of suffering. And ultimately, that means every human being. One could say Jesus is the archetype for every human. Every human being is crucified by life. Every human being goes through the suffering. And with the suffering comes the possibility of transcending the ego by entering a state of complete surrender and acceptance. Ultimately, you step out of your thinking mind. And what's left when you're no longer thinking about yourself and your life and what went wrong, in fact, thinking subsides. And what's left of you when you're not thinking about yourself or about anything? Is that even possible? Is that even possible? For example, at this moment, are you able to experience, as you sit there, being in that space of not needing to add any thought to this moment? Can you allow this moment to be as it is, so completely that you do not add any interpretation to it? Just be it. So what is left of you right now? You're not remembering your story because you are still completely yourself without the story. Isn't that surprising? Even without remembering all your past suffering, there is a sense of being. In fact, it's stronger. You don't remember all the things that went wrong in your life. Okay, that's gone. You don't even remember your email address. It's gone. Or your telephone number. You don't need it right now. When you need it, it'll be there. You don't need it. That's gone. So instead of I am this and I am that and I am that, what remains is a sense of beingness, which is I am. But nothing is added to the I am. This is what's left of you right now. What is left there's a stillness. When thinking subsides, you have not lost consciousness. You have not gone down, you have not fallen below thinking. You have risen above thinking. There are two ways of becoming free of compulsive thinking, which is how the ego arises. There are two ways of becoming free of compulsive thinking, the compulsive thinking that makes your life miserable, not the thinking that is useful, not the thinking that is a useful tool for creating and manifesting and inventing things and so on. There's a beautiful thing. Thinking is an enormous advance for humans, the evolution of human consciousness. But the way it has developed now, humans are possessed by thinking. They do not think. The language you use, you say, I think. You don't think. Thinking happens to you. and the thoughts that happen to you are thoughts that you absorb from the surrounding culture. You watch the media, the mainstream media, and you take that in, and then you regurgitate it. This is what I think. Or you're against it, and this is what I think. Thinking happens to you. You don't think unless you are aware. And awareness or presence is a dimension of consciousness that is deeper, or we could say higher, than thinking. Awareness is when thinking stops and you have not gone to sleep. In fact, you are more alert than before. And you can look around wherever you are. For example, here and now in this room, you can look around this room and perceive everything visually and listen to everything without adding any thought to it. Just be still and perceive. There's still a knowing there, but it's not conceptual knowing. There's a deeper knowing there. Become familiar with the state of being free of thinking and just aware. But that requires a certain alertness. Without the alertness, you drift back into thinking. So what the true spiritual teaching shows you the way of rising above thinking so that you can begin to use thinking, not you as the ego, but you as the higher consciousness that you are, can use thinking as a tool instead of being used by thinking, by thought. So there are two ways of being free of thinking. One is rising above, which is why we're here. The other is falling below. If you want to fall below, you have to walk out of here, go to the bar next door, and order a few whiskeys, and then you can experience becoming free of thinking also, gradually. But you're falling below thinking. Oh, it feels so good. I can't even remember my problems anymore. It feels good. You start singing, oh, and there's the joy of life. No need to think, just be. Have another one. And then, of course, you're moving towards unconsciousness. And this is not the way we are going. It is not the destiny of humanity to regress to a pre-thinking stage just because you want to be as happy as your dog. You say, well, the dog isn't thinking, and so I'm going to go there too. The dog hasn't arrived at the dog is a beautiful manifestation of consciousness, but it's not a thinking consciousness. So you need to discover in yourself the ability to be free of thinking initially for brief moments. And this is a good moment. When you perceive the world around you without mental labels, just an alert presence in the background of your sense perceptions. And this is an amazing thing. What happens? At first it seems, well, what's so great about that? It's the greatest thing that could happen to you, because you begin to access a deeper dimension of who you are. And that sense of I am, of presence, begins to be your source of identity. Your sense of self. Now this is what I call your essence identity. We have already spoken about your form identity. Your form identity is the physical body. Your form identity is the conditioning of your mind, your mental, emotional conditioning. That is your form identity. Then most humans only know themselves as their form identity. And that is the greatest deprivation in life. The greatest poverty in life is not to know yourself in your essence, as who or what you are in your essence. If you only know yourself as form identity, your life is really continuous unhappiness and frustration with a brief interludes when you're okay for a while because something good has just happened, but it never lasts. So there's a possibility of living from a deeper place within yourself, and that is essence identity. And there is no thought in it, there's only a sense of intense, aware presence. And so you can, in your daily life, you can invite this space, the inner space of essence identity, into your life as much as you can. For example, simply by consciously perceiving something without imposing a mental label on it. You look at a flower and you look at it for 15 seconds, 20 seconds, perceive it completely against the background of stillness. So to use an analogy, if you were a painting, let's say it's a strange analogy, but let's use it anyway. If you were a painting, most people think they are whatever the painting depicts. You are the figures on the canvas, the painting. Now, if you are the painting and you suddenly realize there is more to me than whatever the painting shows, more essentially, I am the canvas on which this is painted. So you become aware of yourself as the canvas essentially, and whatever is on it is an addition. Another analogy we could use, another weird analogy, let's say you are this room. If I asked yourself to describe who or what you are, you would describe yourself in terms of floor, walls, ceilings, lights, maybe the furniture in the room. That's me, this, that. Okay, you can talk about it for a long time, and then after a while you stop talking. And then I say, is there not more to you than what you've been speaking about? And you would say, well, maybe there is, but I need a few years of psychoanalysis to find out what that is. Okay, you do a few years of psychoanalysis, and then you come back and I say, Okay, what have you found out? I said, well, in my childhood I found this, and it's a long story. It's very helpful, it's useful, can be useful to know. And then I ask again, is there not something else that you have neglected, you have not mentioned, and suddenly the room, which is you, becomes aware and says, oh, I forgot about this wonderful space that has no form, but that is the essence of who I am. Without this space, there would be no room. I am essentially the space. And this applies to you. Let's let go of the analogy. Essentially, you are the space of consciousness, the unconditioned consciousness. You are conscious. Are you not at this moment? The one thing that is beyond doubt in your life. Everything can be doubted. You can doubt whether this is real. Am I dreaming this? Maybe you are. But even if you were dreaming this, and in life is a little bit like a dream, because things come and go very quickly, they disappear. Even if it is a dream, what is it that you cannot doubt? You cannot doubt that there is a consciousness in which the dream appears. You cannot doubt, and you can sense it within yourself at this moment, that you are conscious, that you are consciousness. You are. So I'm asking you now a strange question. Can you be aware or conscious right now of the fact that you are conscious? Can you sense at this moment that you are conscious? Can you, another way of putting it, can you sense your own beingness, that you are? Can you sense the I am without any addition? Not this or that or that. I am. And that is ancient wisdom. Already in ancient Greece, there was an inscription on the temple of Apollo, and that said, know yourself, know thyself. And this is what we are talking about. At the deepest level, knowing yourself is not knowing your story. It's fine, there's a place for that too. But knowing yourself is knowing yourself in your essence. Now, many people did not understand this inscription on the temple of Apollo. They were interested in other things. But next to it there was another little inscription that gave the key to what it means to know thyself, and most people had overlooked that. It was just one letter, and that letter that was inscribed also in that temple was A. And people thought this must be meaningless, or maybe the sculptor forgot to complete the word. And it was pointed out later, much later, by Plutarch, the philosopher, that he said quite clearly, this letter is the second person singular, which, by the way, happens to be the same as in French, tu es, you are. It said in ancient Greek, you are, second person singular. Also on one side it said, know thyself. And then a little bit away from there it said, you are. So you would look at that, know thyself, you are. And then you go, I am. The key to knowing thyself is the I am realization, which somewhere in the Old Testament, this is one of the great highlights of the Bible. And there are some highlights there, undoubtedly, also other things. God is asked, who are you? I am that I am. So God defines him, her, itself through the word I am. And Jesus said, I am the truth, the way, and something else. I'm not good at quoting the Bible. I am the truth, the way, and the light, maybe. And people have interpreted this as meaning, I am the one. In mind, if you allow me my interpretation of it, I believe they've omitted one word, and that is the word is, and then the line would read, I am the way, I am is the way and the life and the truth. I am, the I am realization is the way, the life, the truth. So, and this is why another wonderful pointer in the New Testament is two sayings. I promise I won't quote anymore after this. Jesus said, talking to his disciples, presumably, you are the light of the world. He also said it about himself, I am the light of the world. It's in two different Gospels. You are the light of the world. This is a very powerful pointer towards self-realization. You are the light of the world. What does that mean? Does that mean that the people he was speaking to are very special? No, they were not special. They were not educated, probably. They were simple people. They had no social position. So he wasn't talking about that. He wasn't saying you are VIPs. What was he then saying? He was pointing to the essence identity of those humans. The light, what is the light of the world? What is it that illuminates the entire world, without which there would be no world? Consciousness. The consciousness. The universe is a miraculous and mysterious thing. Outer space is, there's so much we don't know about it, and it's vast and unimaginable. Atomic, subatomic space, also to very, very mysterious realm, very mysterious dimension. So you have two great mysteries, the smallest and the biggest. But an even greater mystery is that the universe is conscious. That is the greatest mystery. And that's not even mentioned by most scientists, because they don't know what to do with consciousness. Where is it? Well, the thing that's looking for it is it. Okay, so consciousness can never become an object. Consciousness is the eternal subject. This is why science cannot examine consciousness. So the universe is conscious, but is that true? How do I know that? I know that because I am conscious. And you know that because you are conscious. But they are not two different consciousnesses. The word in English does not even have a plural. I don't know if the word in French has a plural. There is one consciousness, and this is something that science has not discovered yet. Maybe one day science and spirituality will merge into one. And what I'm saying now, you don't have to believe. It comes from an intuitive realization. Whether or not you believe it doesn't matter very much. It's not the absolute essence of our evening together. Consciousness, so this is it. Consciousness pervades the entire universe, and consciousness becomes focalized in where certain life forms appear. The brain is an instrument through which consciousness expresses itself in a particular form. Undoubtedly, there is a link between the brain and consciousness. So in the same way that there's a link between the television receiver and what it is that it receives. So this is so amazing that it is possible for you to realize your essence identity as the consciousness of the universe. That is, you transcend you are a person for a little while, you are a person here, that's fine, not for long, but you transcend something, that there's something in you that manifests briefly as a person, like a ray of sunlight manifesting briefly as this or that person. Let me talk for just one moment about the taboo word. And that taboo word is God. I say it is a taboo word because I usually try to avoid it because it creates many misunderstandings. But now I'll use it for a moment. God is the source of all life. Transcendent source, has no location in space or time. It transcends this dimension. The best analogy for God perhaps would be to say it's a bit like the sun, which continuously pours out energy and light, well, we perceive it as light, and when the ray of the sunlight touches your skin, are you touching the sun? Well, no, because if you touched the sun, your hand would disappear immediately. However, the ray of sunlight is still connected to the sun. It is an extension of the sun. So, when Jesus says, "You are the light of the world," he refers to the consciousness that you are. And the consciousness that you are is an emanation of the source, the transcendent source of all light, in the same way that the light that we perceive from the sun is an emanation of the sun. And this emanation from the source is you, appears as a person. And it's like a ray of consciousness. And perhaps it appears as another person and another. The same ray may continue for a while until it fully realizes its identity. You are an emanation of that, and this is not just abstract. The strange thing is you can sense that in yourself the moment thinking subsides and presence, I am presence, remains. And there's an absolute stillness there. In that stillness, from the point of view of conceptual self, you don't know anything anymore because there's no thinking. There's no conceptual knowing in that stillness. And yet, you are connected with a much vaster and deeper conceptual knowing. And this is why this connectedness with the source of who you are, that is also the source of wisdom. Wisdom is not created by analytical thought, is not created by more information. Wisdom arises from the depths of non-conceptual, unconditioned consciousness or intelligence. If you are connected with that, which means sense that space within yourself, if you're connected with that, then you have access to the source of what is traditionally called wisdom. And not only wisdom, also you have access to the source of all creativity. Because the conceptual mind itself cannot create anything new. It can give it form, but it cannot create it. And to create anything new, or even to have an original insight that suddenly manifests as a thought, even to have that, you need for a moment to be connected with the non-conceptual intelligence within you, which means for a moment your thinking needs to subside. There needs to be just a space of aware presence, stillness. You've risen above thinking. There's stillness. And then out of that stillness, if anything that is needed comes as a realization, an intuition, an interesting or new thought, any form of creativity arises out of that. And not only that, something else that arises out of that dimension of consciousness is a feeling of connectedness with other life forms and other human beings. A feeling of strong connectedness with other human beings is particularly important, but you can feel it more easily at first with animals, perhaps, or nature, trees, flowers, plants. You look at them and you're not thinking, you just perceive them, and then you can perceive their essential beingness. You can, for example, you can look at a flower or a tree for a minute, whatever, and the tree, you can sense the stillness in which it exists as a living presence. The tree, some trees survive for hundreds of years, even thousands of years. The trees are so still. And if your mind is still also, and you're looking at a tree, you can sense the essence of that tree in that stillness of the tree. There's a living essence there that is very, very different consciousness from yours, the same consciousness, but a very different manifestation in a completely different vibrational frequency. And then you connect with this tree as you'd never connected before, because before the tree was a label, and the label covered up the reality of the tree. It covered it up. It said, oh, that's an oak tree, or such and such. That's a label. But when the label disappears, when you need the label, you have it. But when you don't need it, you put it aside. That's the art of living. You can use labels when you need them, but don't let life be obscured by mental labels. So you can look at the oak tree, but it's no longer an oak tree. It's just a beingness there. And the tree is, you connect it in that stillness, you connect with the tree and the flower. And then you look into the eyes of a dog and you love that dog, not so much although it's very pleasant to the touch, but what you really love when you look into the eyes of a dog is the consciousness of the dog. You connect with that. You can sense there's a being in there that is invisible, just as most of you is invisible. Wasn't there a French writer who said, Saint-Exupéry said, what is essential is invisible to the eye. Everything that is essential is invisible to the eye. This eye. So it's invisible. You cannot see. You are, or most of you are invisible, even on the mental, even still the form identity that you are is already invisible beyond the physical body. Nobody, if they can open up your brain, they're not going to find a single thought. They don't even know what a thought is. You have a million memories in your brain. How do they survive in there? In what form do they survive in there? Who was your first teacher at school when you were 5 or 6 years old? Stoop, there he or she is. Where was this teacher until now when I remembered him? I don't know. Was it a molecule that said, this is my teacher? We don't know. It's all invisible. You are invisible. The essence of who you are is consciousness. It's obviously, and the dog, the essence of the dog is invisible, but that is what you love in the dog, because you recognize it, not conceptually, but experientially. You recognize it as one with your essence. Just a different expression of consciousness, just as you recognize the tree as ultimately one with your essence. There's the oneness in all life forms are an expression of the one. And then comes the most fascinating thing. You connect with other humans in that way. And that's amazing, because then when you connected through the ego with other humans, there was continuous labeling, judgments, evaluation, continuously seeing is this human being a threat to me, or can I use this human being, or do I want to add this human being to make myself feel better or bigger? There's always that, and that goes, and from this deepest level of presence, when the thinking mind subsides for a moment, and then you look at another human being, and suddenly all these, I talked about wisdom arising from that dimension of consciousness. I talked about creativity arising from that dimension of consciousness. And now talking about empathy arising with other human beings. Now, what does that mean? It means there is a benevolence, to use that word. It's probably a similar word in French because it goes back to Latin. There is a benevolence that emanates from you towards the other. And the other is no longer completely other. And that, when you connect with another human being, and yes, you are aware perhaps of their personality that covers up the essence of that human being, and yet you don't get caught up in the personality. You can actually look deeper and can sense in another what you share, which is consciousness, the one consciousness. And so ultimately what that is love. Not love in a romantic sense, but love as a realization that ultimately you are looking at yourself. So to loving the other as yourself. So there's a self-recognition. So one could almost say that ultimately you only always love yourself, not in an egoic sense, but ultimately when you love any other life form, it's a recognition of the oneness, but you can only recognize it when you are present and for a moment free of mental concepts and thoughts. Then you are the presence. And then you recognize, you can sense the presence in the other who is no longer other. And that's a wonderful thing, because then you go around the world always meeting yourself ultimately, and that makes it very pleasant. And it is much easier then to not tolerate or even overlook the madness that is still there in many human beings, the dysfunctional egoic behavior. You can very often look through it and realize there is that essence. Underneath all that, there is the essence, and I can feel the essence of that person. And if you can feel it, you can sometimes you bring it forth out of the other. So one person can make a lot of difference when you honor the other person by recognizing who they are in their essence. Then that has a very healing effect on the other person. And generally, if you live in connectedness with that dimension, then you truly create a different world and a different reality. So that is really ultimately very simple, and yet we are shifting from thousands of years of being identified with thinking, increasingly more and more and more, and there's a shift that now happens when we step out of identification with thinking. We're no longer addicted to thinking, because otherwise, when you are a compulsive thinker, you are addicted to thinking. And a most large percentage of that thinking is not only unnecessary, it also creates unhappiness, misery, and suffering. So this is the essence, is stepping out of thinking. Meditation can help. If you have a meditation method, the way I teach is choosing to be free of thinking. If you can, just by what we are doing now, is become aware of the present moment, and already thinking begins to subside. Become aware of the present moment. Then you look around and you listen, you look, you sense your surroundings. And if you're very alert, thinking subsides. And already the world seems more alive suddenly. And you perceive beauty everywhere, even in seemingly insignificant things, like how the light is reflected off the floor, which I see here. So that you step out of thinking into the present moment, this moment. The first step is usually become aware of sense perceptions. Then you become aware of your inner body, that you're alive. The inner body is alive, and you sense that aliveness. And then you look around, and you're breathing, and then you become aware of the deeper dimension of the present moment. The way I put it is the present moment has the surface dimension, which is sense perceptions, and that's good. The present moment has a depth dimension, which is consciousness. The mind becomes still, and that stillness is the essence of the present moment. It's the light of consciousness. That is the essence. You've gone deeply into the present moment. And that's something you invite into your life as much as you can, and use your smartphone a little bit less. So instead of uselessly looking at your phone when they're waiting for something, become present. Look around. Sense that alertness. Become familiar with that. And also catch yourself when spontaneously you experience a moment of just being present. It could be when you're engaged in some kind of physical activity, especially a dangerous activity, or they don't recommend it. But some people get addicted to dangerous activities, climbing a mountain, racing a car. Why do they get addicted? Because it frees them from the personality, from the person, from the mind. It forces them into presence. But you don't have to do that. Just go there. Another thing that does it is life gives you a little shock. A little accident or big accident, some loss. These little shocks can also shock you into presence, and suddenly you go, oh. So if you need it, life will give it to you. But the more you voluntarily go there, into that dimension, the less life will need to give you a shock, because you're already doing it. You're aligning yourself with the entire purpose of the universe, which is consciousness, growing in consciousness in this dimension. And one could say, to use theistic language, God expressing himself, herself, itself more and more fully in this dimension. The ultimate purpose, who knows? We cannot go there with our mind. But when the mind stops for a moment and we rise above thinking, we can get some intuition of what the ultimate purpose of the universe is, which is connected with your life purpose here and now. And that's why we can get an intuition of that, but we cannot put it into words or even thoughts. There's a knowing that's completely non-conceptual. So this is I've spoken about the most important things in human life, the transformation of consciousness, things that perhaps one day will be the primary subject at every school. It will be the very foundation for every human life. Right now, it's still a relatively small percentage of humans who are ready and are awakening, but it's growing. Don't let yourself be deceived and think that because the political situation is becoming so chaotic, that means humans are becoming more unconscious. There's an intensification of unconsciousness as there is an intensification of consciousness. The two polarities are there, and it's usually at critical time periods that challenging times, both in a person's life and in the life of the collective, at challenging times, transformation is more possible than at times when there's little or no challenge. Your comfort zone, I don't know if you know that expression, your comfort zone is not the best place for your spiritual awakening, unfortunately. Sorry about that. So this is the secret. Well, it has been a kind of secret for a long time, but now it's out in the open. And it's a great adventure to be part of the unfolding consciousness, which transcends whatever purpose you may have on a personal level. Of course, that continues. You continue to honor your form identity. It doesn't mean that you're only now totally interested in essence identity. I'm not going to eat much anymore. I'm not going to have any bath or shower anymore because the body is an illusion. And no, that's not. You honor your form identity. You do your best you look after the body. You can also honor your form identity on the mental mental emotional level, both collective and personal. You have your parents, you have your ancestors, maybe if you remember them, you have your family, you can have your country, you can honor the culture of your country. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful thing. But if that's the only thing that gives you your identity, then it becomes a huge limitation, and then you probably need others to be less than, or you might even need others to be enemies. But to be honoring your culture is great. If you're not attempting to derive your ultimate identity from that, it's a beautiful thing. So honoring form identity, but being rooted in your essence identity. And that is the secret of life. And with that, I will leave you for tonight. Thank you. Thank you.